intrigues them where they want to read.
And you have to meet a child where they're at. So, for example, like with Moby Dick, a lot of kids these days, they've never seen a whale.
Well, the only ones they usually see is on the news, dead on the beach.
Yeah, they see them in that. So one of my goals with these is like these are set. Like I live in North Central Pennsylvania, so I actually set the books right where I live.
Oh wow!
So like one of the nice things about that is from talking with kids and seeing what the kids are reading. A lot of times now, I've been a reader for a long time, and when I read, I always of course you hear that the book is always better than the movie, and one of the reasons why that is, there's several reasons, but one reason is like when I read a book personally, I see the movie in my head, and it's always better than, because it's more detail, it's more full, it's my own vision of the movie. But what happens with some children if they haven't developed that yet. So of course, my first goal, and with here being the bookstore, is most of my interaction is with local children, and so I'll sell a book and I'll talk to them about, and this book is set right here, so they can actually visit some of the places that are in this book, and and children really like that. I like that when I was growing up. If I read a book that took place in Denver, Colorado, and I've been to Denver, Colorado, I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. I've been here, and this is where the character walked down the street here, and that's what I kind of my goal was with these, is that they can kind of start putting that movie in the mind, kind of start coming alive, and of course these are available all over, but I find that that's been really helpful for a lot of the kids locally.
Oh yeah. Now, hey, you're at the age, you're younger than me. I'm 66. And I still remember when I was a kid, and it wasn't too much of them. There was a couple, like CBS used to have a radio broadcast, radio play, things like Dick Tracy, space things, you name it, adventures and all that stuff. And it used to be on once a week. And, kids, the problem is you had to sit there, right? And it would be usually late at night. The show would come on, I think 10 o'clock Pacific time, anyway, for me, where I lived at. And they would have this, radio play. And you had, close your eyes, and you had to imagine the detective walking down the street and questioning somebody, going up the stairs, the steps and all that stuff. You close your eyes and you kind of filled in all that, what you don't see in your mind, and it really drawed you into it. And that's what's missing nowadays, because kids don't realize before TV came out, it was radio and books. And that type of thing made you use your imagination, and that's what's lacking with a lot of young people today. I hate to say it, they just don't have that type of imagination to do it.
Well, I really agree with that, Gary, and that's, imagination is like the muscles of the mind, and that has to be practiced, and that has to be used just like any other muscle, or else it doesn't grow strong. And the best time to do that is, of course, when you're younger, because just like learning, it's almost like another language, and just like it's a lot easier to learn another language when you're young than when you start getting older. So it's that's when it's really important. I mean, I always feel that it's never too late to become an avid reader, but the younger you start, the better, and it's going to be. It's really important.
Well, I think it opens up young people's minds, too. I mean, I'm sure since you own a bookstore, I think you can probably tell the difference of kids that don't read versus the ones that do read. I think the ones that do read have more of imagination, They
have more imagination, and not just imagination. People quite often think imagination, and they think, oh, yeah, well, it's imagination would be really nice, but it's more, imagination is the gateway to, problem solving, and and that's what we're going to need, for the future. I mean, mankind has always been clever, but if we want to keep that, we have to keep using our mind. So, imagination, creativity isn't just for writing books or making artwork. It's for making the next improvement in the engine. It's the next step for making computers more efficient. It's the next step to making life for mankind easier.
I think it makes also a person more fuller because they can enjoy life more. I mean, I hate to say it, but like one of my kids, was so obsessed with, when he was like 13 years old, actually 11 years old, he was so obsessed with video games that he would go over to his friend's house. They would play and spend the night or the weekend, right? And they would play video games for 24 hours straight, drinking energy drinks like it was going out of, style. The other kid's mother was buying them like, I don't know how much. Well, besides doing damage to my son, which he ended up becoming an epileptic from it, because of, the flashes of the video game on the screen and then drinking high dosages of energy drink, did some brain damage to him. Seriously. He had like 18 seizures, one right after another. And he's never been the same. And so many kids, rather than picking up a book and educating themselves, okay? Look how many kids out there came and write. If you give them a sheet of paper and say, hey, write a short story, they came and do it. And that's what's scary, because they don't have the imagination to be able to think about it and to compose something. And that's where I am scared about with the younger people. Yeah, they might be really good at playing video games. They might be really good at talking about music. But when it comes to, I think using their imagination and using their brain power, they're lacking.
Exactly. I mean, because it's composing. You can not just listen to music, but you can compose your own music. You can write your own lyrics. You can write your own stories. If, like I always say, if there's a story that you want and there's nothing out there, well, you can write that. And stories are how we communicate with each other as a species, and how we have for from time where we sat around the fire and talked about what was outside the fire, and that's.
Oh, you mean ghost stories and fun things like that?
Ghost stories and fun stories and stories, and just all types of stories. Stories about how the day and how we relate information. I mean, you can learn a lot from stories. Like they were stories of the hunt and how you would hunt, and to stories of things that went bump in the night and caution. So I mean, some of those are entertainment, and some of those are cautionary tales of it's always of building awareness. I mean, if you're going to do something in the middle of the dark, awareness is very important. So those stories are both entertaining and access a part of the human psyche, but they also I think they also educate.
Oh, they do. Karen Banks is, on our chat line, and she goes, yes, the imagination is endangered. And then Terry Morgan says, kids just don't think nowadays. That's off the chat line what somebody said.
And that's kind of my goal with these, is to get people and children to think for themselves. Because like when I get done, I have something called because there's ninjas, and I enjoyed martial arts growing up and being a ninja. So I have something called being a reading ninja, and this is where I give you a little information about the creature at the end, and then you read up more on it, and you find out a little bit more. So these are all to kind of to get their appetite going, because my goal is, as of course, for them to read my books, but not just to read my books, but to want to read other books as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what when I was a kid, I remember my mom would sit down and read stories to me. My grandmother would sit down and read stories to me, and then when I got to my kids, at least a couple of them they enjoyed it to a certain age. We sit down and we'd have story night where we sit there for about a half an hour, and I would read a chapter or two. Of a book they chose, and, they would get into it. And, they couldn't wait. They couldn't wait for the next week for we could go the next chapter.
No, and that's what I found, that there are, like with these are short chapters, so these are great for reading before you go to bed. And actually, of course, when I first started writing these, I tested them, so I just didn't put them out. So of course, getting in the right mindset to write these, but you also test them too. So I mean, of course, I know children. I have like nieces and nephews, so I would test these on my nieces. And when I first started writing these, like, my nieces were younger. That now they're at the age where they can read them themselves. But I would read them, and I would give them to my sister for them to read to my nieces at night, and they would read a chapter at night, and they would she would say, "Oh, I wish you would have these be shorter because they want more than one, because they're a little too long to read the entire thing at one night, and they would want more than one chapter, which is good."
Well, I got to ask you a question. What got you into writing these stories, Kevin?
Well, these stories, it has an interesting background because I would write essays, like in book reviews, essays for the local paper. I had a column. And newspapers, I don't have to tell you, aren't what they used to be. So the newspapers kind of stopped paying as much. So I started writing some screenplays. And so I wrote my first screenplay. And what do you do once you get done with a screenplay?
Yeah, what do you actually? I mean, I've had a couple people on recently that wrote for Star Trek: The Next Generation and a couple other of the Star Trek's different series, and they had to put a lot of research into it.
It's a lot of research. It's a tough market to break into. So I wrote some screenplays, and basically I didn't know what to do once I got done with writing a screenplay. I tried shipping it around a little bit. I didn't have really any contacts in the industry, so I just kind of let it sit. And then what happened was, I had this idea for the Ninja Raccoons, a long time ago, meaning maybe 6-7 years ago, but I had the bookstore. I had already had the bookstore, but the bookstore is more than a full-time job, and we're open most days of the week. Like this time of year, we're open 7 days a week. So when I get home, I didn't really want to do anything else. But I had this idea that a long time ago, that I sat down with my friend and we did some concept art. But then it just kind of got put on the back burner, one of those things I'm going to get to, and I never did. And then what happened is, after I wrote one of my screenplays, I saw that Nickelodeon, the TV station, was holding a contest, and they were looking for a new animated TV series. And I'm like, wow, the Ninja I'm like, the Ninja Raccoons, this idea I had, that would be a great series. Because, of course, most people have heard of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I'm like, well, that's nice, but they're turtles. I mean, turtles are ninjas? That's kind of crazy. But I always thought raccoons would be perfect ninjas because, they already have the mask, and they have those little human hands. And if you've ever seen a raccoon try to get, or not try, I mean, pretty much they always do, get on your bird feeder. I mean, they're little ninjas already. So I'm like, raccoons would be perfect ninjas. So what I did is I wrote it in screenplay format, and I wrote I wrote a scene for the contest, and I sent it in. And of course, what they did is they got lots of entries, so they ultimately passed. But I started, and I wrote what became the first chapter of the Totally Ninja Raccoons Meet Bigfoot. And once I got going, what I said is wow, I really like this. I want to see how it turns out. So I wrote the rest of the book, and I just kept going from there.
Oh, wow. And how did the sales in the first book do?
The sales of the first book were, they were okay. But what happens is, especially with this series, is they were